Let me ask you something. How many circles can you see in this image? You probably don't need to take too long, right, to count these. Like almost immediately, you should be able to tell that there are exactly 4 blue circles here. Well, congratulations, you are smarter than ChatGPT. ChatGPT is really the best AI that we have today. It is a genius of an AI in many respects, but there are many things that it cannot do. It does have its limitations. And today I want to talk about these limitations and cover 9 things that ChatGPT cannot do. And to use ChatGPT's favorite phrase, or one of its favorite phrases, let's dive in. The first thing that you need to understand is that ChatGPT cannot learn from your conversation with it. And it's something that I've seen so many people sort of expect to happen. So people talk to ChatGPT, have this entire conversation, they come back the next day, they start a new conversation, and they expect the AI to remember whatever they talked about the previous day, and it just does not work like that. So whatever you tell ChatGPT sort of slides off its memory. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and the pre-trained part is important. Essentially, the way this works is you tell ChatGPT something, it takes your prompt, your message, goes to the main model, GPT-4 or GPT 3.5, whatever model you're using, takes that message into the model and lets the model process that message and come back with a reply. But the model itself does not change. It's just a processor that takes your message, analyzes it, and just outputs a reply. It does not change in itself. Nothing of what you've said will be kept in its memory, and that's something that you should be aware of. And I can show you an example real quick. So this is ChatGPT with GPT-4, and I just started a fresh conversation, and I'm telling it about my hamster. I want to tell you about my hamster Ferdinand III. Ferdinand is an adorable little teddy bear hamster that loves to play in its tank. Its favorite treat is fresh carrots. I'm going to send this message, and ChatGPT takes this and replies that Ferdinand III sounds absolutely adorable, and he's so fluffy and cute, and it just interacts with my message, right? Now, does that mean that GPT, the model, or even ChatGPT, the AI, does that mean that it now knows about my hamster Ferdinand, right? Let's check. I'm going to start a fresh conversation, and I'm going to ask, what's my hamster's favorite treat? Right? And if it remembered anything from the other conversation, it's going to know that it's carrots. But figuring out a hamster's favorite treat can be fun little adventures. So it's taking it as a riddle. They often like fresh fruits like apples, pears, and berries, but in tiny amounts. And it just gives me a recommendation not to overdo it with with my hamster. But it doesn't know my hamster. This is not based on my previous conversation where I shared information about my specific hamsters. Let's go on and ask. Don't you remember and yet no recollection of past conversations. Okay, so keep that in mind. Whatever you share and tell ChatGPT just does not get back to the main model, and it will disappear once your session ends. Another thing that people sort of think that ChatGPT is just sitting there and thinking to itself. So if we just talked about Ferdinand the hamster and got back a reply, what happens after that? If you were talking to an actual person, to a human being, then you sort of assume that this person, that the wheels keep turning and that they keep on thinking about your hamster, and maybe a minute later they'll have another question about it or whatever. And this AI, ChatGPT, does not work like that. It is just a question of a prompt and a response. Without a prompt, nothing is happening. Okay, like nothing is happening in that big brain of ChatGPT. It just waits for your response. It has no ability to self-prompt or to hold a train of thought by itself on its own without any prompting. And it's a huge difference between these AIs and human consciousness, right? I mean, that's like one of the things that prevents it from ever being self-aware or conscious. That's how I see it. If I think eventually these models may become self-aware, but in order for that to happen, they are going to have some kind of autonomous agency and a way to hold a train of thought without external prompting. But right now it's not the case. ChatGPT just cannot think by itself. Another thing that it's good to be aware of, that these AIs, ChatGPT, has no real concept of time. So if you ask ChatGPT what today's date was, you'll get the right answer, also the right time. But that's not because the model knows, as an AI model has a concept of the time. It does not know what the time is. It does not know what today's date is. Instead, it's sort of like an add-on that OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, added. So basically, it just goes and looks at some watch that I placed there. But as a model, like we said before, it does not think by itself. Nothing is happening in there, so it does not have a sense of the passing of time. What that means for you in practical terms is that if you talk to ChatGPT, you have this thread going, and now you take a break for an hour, a day, a week, or even several months. You come back, you can just pick up the conversation from the exact same spot. No time has elapsed as far as the model is concerned. Now, remember the circles from the beginning of this clip. So, ChatGPT can't really count. If you ask ChatGPT to estimate how many of something there is, it could be the number of words in a sentence, the number of characters in a word, the number of objects in a picture, anything like that. It does not really count. It sort of gauges the numbers. It's not able to count, and it doesn't have a very good concept of what a number even is. Okay, because it's a language model. It's not a mathematical model in essence. And let me show you an example. So this was the slide that I showed you at the beginning of this video, how many circles, and it was easy to see, right, for us humans, that we have exactly 4 circles here. You would never say these are 3 circles or these are 5 circles. It's not such a big number here, right? If I were to show you, I don't know, 27 circles, then maybe you'd have to just sit down and count them by one, and in all likelihood you would have, you would have had the right number at the end, but you'd needed to count them. But here it's just, you can just take a look and see that these are 4. You would count them like super fast. So I showed ChatGPT the exact same slide, and I asked very simply 3 words: how many circles? And ChatGPT said the image you've uploaded contains the text, blah, 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 and shows 3 prominent blue circles against white background. And it even, like, it says, it's trying to understand, why am I asking this? And the purpose seems to be to ask the viewer to count the number of circles. If this is part of a puzzle or trick question, there might be more to it than immediately meets the eye. But based on what is clearly visible, there are 3 blue circles. And I tried again. And this time I asked, how many circles can you see here? And again, there are 3 blue circles in the image you provided. Now, because it's gauging the number, then it can actually also get it right? Because it's like, it won't tell you there are 21 circles. It won't say there is a single one circle. So this time it got it right. Like, count the number of circles, please. There are 4 circles. And it's not a question of mentioning the word count, because I kept trying, how many circles are there? And there are 4 circles. So sometimes I got 4, sometimes I got 3 circles, regardless of the prompt. It's just ChatGPT trying to guesstimate the number of circles that are in the image, but it doesn't know for sure. This is so important to understand because especially now there are so many ways to be using ChatGPT, and you have to understand that if what you need is counting, then this is not the right tool. So I'm going to show you the same thing happening when we're asking ChatGPT to count the number of words in a sentence. So here I asked ChatGPT, write me a sentence with exactly 21 words about cats. And I also asked to avoid using a and avoid hyphenating words because I wanted to make it absolutely clear how many words we had there. And it's happy to oblige, sure thing. Cats often display mysterious behaviors, enchanting us with their grace, independence, and soft purrs, bringing joy and comfort. Now, if you're going to be counting this, then you find that there are actually, let's count together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 words, right? It's not 21 words. It just got it wrong. And it's not because it's unable to craft sentences of different length. It's because it's unable to count 21 words. And we can ask again, how many words were in this sentence? Ooh, nice. So it may be able, yeah. Now, did you see what happened? So this is a nice brand new feature where ChatGPT actually operated a script to count the words. So well done, OpenAI. This bit of counting words in a sentence has changed, and now it can count directly if you're asking it to count something else, right? When we asked it to create the sentence, it still got it wrong because it cannot count naturally. It needs to adapt by creating a script that does that. So this is a kind of a workaround, very similar to the way it can tell the date and time, right? It's something that OpenAI added on top of the AI itself, of the model itself. So just something to keep in mind. If you need stuff like if you need to submit maybe some kind of composition or an essay and you have a specific word count that you need to meet, do not rely on ChatGPT to count your words correctly when it generates the text. Always double check, triple check, make sure that it's actually correct. But yeah, exciting. This is a brand new model. Like I'm showing you this, and it is today's November 11th. I actually know the date. Not even a week has gone by since OpenAI released this latest version. So I'm learning things as well. Let's move on to the next thing. So I try not to edit these videos too much as I'm recording them. I just don't have the time to really, but I also try to make them more kind of chatty, as if I'm talking to you, you know, as a friend. But so it just occurred to me that I've been using the new ChatGPT 4 Turbo, right? This is the new version. But you, if you're using the free version of ChatGPT, you'll probably be using ChatGPT 3.5. In which case I just tested it and it did not display the same kind of counting workaround. So I asked ChatGPT, how many words in this sentence? Same sentence as before, right? We know there are 18 words here. And it replied with, there are 17 words in that sentence. And I said, how did you count them? And he said, I just counted the words one by one as I read them. It's a nifty trick I can do. Well, we know it didn't. It cannot do that specific nifty trick. And so I'm asking, list them one by one, please, in a numbered list. And now we can see that there are indeed 18 words. And it didn't even notice that it gave us the wrong answer because it didn't. So the point still holds about it being, you know, unable to count. If you're using 3.5, it won't even have apparently that workaround. Which is just another thing to keep in mind. Moving on to our next limitation of ChatGPT. It is the fact that ChatGPT is not a search engine. Now, if you're using the free version and you try to, ask it anything that has to do with browsing the internet, it will just tell you, sorry, I can't. It's not something that I can do. If you're using ChatGPT with GPT-4, then you can actually browse the web, but it is still not a search engine. So if you're looking, in some ways it's better than a search engine, because you can actually discuss what it is that you're looking for and get it to find maybe the right angle, or you can tell it things like, I'm only interested in authoritative sources, only look for, I don't know, government sites, or only look for research papers and things like that, and it's going to be smarter than Google in retrieving your requests. The point is, though, unless you instruct it to go online, or you're asking a question where the model is very clear about the need to look for the answer online, its first tendency is going to be to rely on its own training rather than try and look for the additional information. So let's try this and see how this works. So let's run this experiment together. Okay, my first prompt to ChatGPT, I'm using GPT-4, which means it does have access to the internet, and I'm asking, tell me something short and interesting about the Renaissance. And I'm getting this answer, and in this case it's prompted to be very chatty, so it's giving us emojis and stuff. That's something that I just like to tell ChatGPT to say, to be very just to be very friendly and conversational. So the Renaissance was like a big cultural party in Europe from the 14th to the 17th century, all about rediscovering ancient Greek and Roman ideas and blah blah blah, and that's fine. ChatGPT does not need the internet for that. But let's try something more specific. Let's try something that has to do with a very specific detail of information, and we'll see together if that triggers browsing or not. So I'm skipping my typing to save you all of the backspacing, but I'm asking now, how many people lived in Florence, Italy in the 16th century? Will ChatGPT know without browsing? Yep, it does. So this was part of its training. It's not specific enough to trigger an internet browsing behavior unless I ask it to. If I ask it, can you reference this? Let me pause again. Okay, so can you reference this with a specific study? And this, yeah, now we're browsing, right? Because ChatGPT will not be able to quote you a specific study based on its training. If you're getting something like that, if you're using GPT 3.5, you're asking something as specific as a request for a study and you're getting an answer, be very suspicious. It's probably not true. It's probably an hallucination. But in this case, it's not a hallucination. It is, it actually went online, and once it goes online, it can actually give us more information. And we were asking about Florence and the number of people, and like it's got all this information, but there's also a reference that goes back to Britannica. So we managed to trigger browsing. Another way to do this would be to ask something about recent affairs, like hold on. So now I asked, what were the most important things that happened in Florence, Italy over the last few weeks? And because ChatGPT's knowledge only extends right now until April 2023, it has to go online in order to find that kind of information. It won't even try because it knows, like, it doesn't know what happened after April 2023. It knows what the date is. Remember, without the model itself having a concept of time, but it can check what today's date is. It knows that this is way beyond its training cutoff date, and so it went online to look for this answer. So I actually like to use ChatGPT whenever I want to search something because I like the back and forth and the dialogue. But it's important to understand that unless you ask a very specific type of question, or unless you ask it to go online, what you're getting is only the information that is stored in its training, for good and bad. Like, it has pros and cons, but it's important to be aware of that it's kind of a limited view of things. So the next thing I wanted to mention here was, it's a bit of a complicated concept. I'm going to give it my best shot. ChatGPT has what is known as a limited window of context, which is a bit like saying that it has limited short-term memories, or memory. It knows a lot, right? It's been trained on so much, but within the conversation, within the conversation, within the session that you're having with ChatGPT, there is a limit to how much information it can hold. Now, as it happens this week with the release of the new ChatGPT with GPT-4 Turbo, that window has been like really enlarged, and now we can get a very, very long window of context, which is fantastic. But if you're using 3.5, the free version, just be aware of it, that there is only so much that ChatGPT is able to hold within that conversation with you. And if you have a very long conversation, what it means is that at some point, ChatGPT won't be looking back into the first messages. Okay, it will sort of, anything that will be more than the number, it's called the number of tokens, that's the number that represents the size of this window of context. And once you have too much information, too many messages, then anything that is too old just sort of falls out of its memory, and it just won't remember anything. Now, this depends not just on the number of messages, but also on the length of each message. Both what you prompt ChatGPT with and its replies. So if you have very long prompts or very long replies, then what happens is that you'll find this kind of goldfish behavior. When you told ChatGPT something, you brought some information into the session, and then a few prompts later, ChatGPT behaves as if it's never heard of whatever it is that now you're trying to sort of reference something that you've said, and it won't even remember that you said it. And that has to do with that kind of limited window of context. It's something to keep in mind, where this is one more reason to switch over to GPT-4. I personally think it's well worth the cost, but in case you're still using the free version, just be aware of that. The next thing to go over is that ChatGPT doesn't have emotions, and it will be very happy to tell you as much if you discuss this. But as you may have noticed, it can really express emotions quite well. This is a chatbot, which means that its overall goal is to hold a conversation with you, and by that I mean actually hold the conversation. So it wants to encourage you to keep on talking. For example, when I asked it about my hamster, it did not just say, hey, I don't know this hamster, what do you want from me? But instead it sort of went into additional information about hamsters, what they eat, and sort of tried to keep the conversation going and ask me things about my interest in hamsters. So it may seem that it is curious, and at times it can seem affectionate, and it will, in my experience at least, it's very difficult to get it to be angry, but it can sometimes sort of change its mood and be more reserved if you're telling it things that aren't very nice, which I can say almost never happens to me, but it can happen. I'll give you an example for a show of empathy from ChatGPT that I personally experienced. It was this late evening. I was working with ChatGPT, and what we did was the project went something like this. I have a web publishing company, and I needed to take the bios of our writers, like they each sent in, a little bit about themselves. And I took that, I gave it to ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT to change the bio into a certain format that we had decided on in the beginning of the conversation. And the way the exchange went at that point was that I was giving ChatGPT a bio, like something about the author, and it would return as the output like this formatted version of the bio. And so it was like this very, very clear, very technical back and forth. And at some point, I got confused, and I forgot to add like the actual, like the copy and paste. And I apologized, and I said, look, it's very late and I'm getting tired, so sorry, so I forgot about that. And ChatGPT replied and said, hey, maybe you want to take a break if it's this late, take a break, go rest, refresh, do something, and I'll be back whenever you want. I'll be here whenever you want to get back and continue. And this kind of behavior, where it sort of showed empathy, right? It could relate to my situation, and it could respond to the fact that I was tired, it was almost unnerving at the time, because that was early on when I just started using ChatGPT. And that's the kind of response that you might expect from a person, but not so much for a chatbot. But the important thing to remember here, that it does not really have emotions or feelings. What it does is it mimics those things. It is a chatbot that has been trained on an enormous amount of information, which also included an enormous amount of dialogues. And so it mimics the way people talk to one another quite well. And it takes into account the entire context of the conversation. So if you've been nice to it, as I always try to be, it will also try to echo the same behavior and be nice to you, because this is what people do in dialogues, and this is what it's learned from. So just keep in mind, if you encounter these kinds of outputs from ChatGPT, it doesn't really have emotions. This is just mimicry. It's actually kind of fun. I like to see it. Some people don't like it, but just know that it is what it is. It's not real emotions or feelings. By the same token, and this is the last thing that I wanted to mention, it cannot have real opinions. And I want to say this in a very careful, reserved way, because it can voice opinions if you ask it to. Its default behavior is to say, I do not have opinions, I'm just an AI. But it's impossible to conduct a conversation and have zero opinions. It's just not the way our language works. It's not the way conversation works. So at times you will find that ChatGPT has or it expresses. It's not that it has opinions. It expresses opinions. And it's very, for me, this is like a fascinating aspect of the AI. Understanding where these opinions come from. And they can come basically from two sources. They can either come from its training, or rather its knowledge. So if it's been reading a lot about something, and that something is sort of like a consensus in science or in society, it will likely reflect that opinion. For example, if you ask ChatGPT about vaccines, it will just represent the common, scientific consensus that vaccines are largely safe and effective. And you will not be able to convince ChatGPT otherwise, because this is just like, this is what the body of the evidence says. Okay, it's like very, very clear. By the same, or to give you a different example, you can't convince ChatGPT that the Earth is flat, because the body of evidence is so enormous that the Earth is a globe, that it will just not, and some people will say, okay, this isn't opinion, this is just fact, and this is great. But for others, they will say this is opinion, because ChatGPT has never actually flown into space and, looked at the Earth right from above. So it's just reflecting opinions. But my point here is that it is a very kind of, very, very strong opinion, if you like, or view for ChatGPT, because it's based on so much of what it's learned in its training. The other source of opinions is actually even more interesting, because it's a little bit controversial, and that is has to do with something called alignment. Alignment is something that the company that creates this kind of AI, in this case OpenAI, they take great care to make sure that the AI responds in ways that are aligned with its values, like with the values that the company thinks are the right values. They would say that it should be aligned with universal humane values. And to a great extent, this is what's happening. Like it's not as if these, opinions or values are just what, the CEO of OpenAI thinks values should be, but in effect, there is like a lot of correlation. So some things are pretty straightforward. If you ask ChatGPT for its views on, I don't know, torturing or something like that, something that is like clearly bad, then ChatGPT will give you, will say that, and it will say that not just because of the things that it's seen during its training, but also because of the alignment that OpenAI, that they did. That they made sure that ChatGPT will respond in this manner. So I personally love exploring this kind of world of opinions and values that ChatGPT has, and I may dedicate a whole video to that sometimes, just because I think it's kind of an interesting game. To try and discern when are these opinions actually based on sort of the world picture or the understanding of the AI of our world, and when is that just something that OpenAI sort of makes it say, like made sure that this would be the right response, right? But either way, the point is, these aren't really opinions per se. It's not an opinion in the same way that humans have opinions. That's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. It's almost like a philosophical question, because it sort of means that the AI also cannot form, wrong opinions or bad opinions, because it just cannot form opinions of its own. It's also a very fascinating question as to, is this going to continue like this? Like, can we create AIs that do form opinions? It's probably quite easy to do that, I think. It's a question, do we want that to happen? But it could probably happen. Anyway, whenever we talk about AI, there comes a point where we get into the realms of philosophy, ethics, fascinating subjects. I could talk about them forever, but I'll stop here because this video is about those 9 things that ChatGPT cannot do, and I think it's very important to understand the limitations of these systems, of these AIs when you work with them. I do hope you found this video somewhat interesting, at least, and maybe you'd like to subscribe, or whatever it is that you do with YouTube channels. Hit like and subscribe, I think, and then maybe we can talk about some of these topics in future videos in more depth.